Yet Barry Gibb met someone who thanked him for a moment he never knew about. Chapter 1. The Quiet Afternoon. The Los Angeles sun hung low over the Santa Monica Pier, casting long golden shadows across the wooden planks. It was late October, and the coastal breeze carried a coolness that felt like relief after weeks of relentless heat. Barry Gibb walked slowly along the pier, hands tucked into the pockets of his well-worn leather jacket, observing the rhythm of the ocean below with the patience of someone who had learned to appreciate stillness. At 77, he had earned the right to these moments. The world knew him as one of the Bee Gees, as a voice that had defined generations, as a hitmaker whose songs had soundtracked weddings, heartbreaks, and everything in between. But here, among tourists with melting ice cream cones, street performers juggling colorful pins, and fishermen patiently waiting for a catch that might never come, he was just another face in the crowd, and that anonymity felt like a gift. He paused near the edge of the pier, gripping the weathered wooden railing. Below, the waves crashed against the support beams with a rhythmic persistence that was almost meditative. A flock of seagulls circled overhead, their cries sharp against the murmur of human voices and the distant sound of a carousel playing tinny music. To his left, a young boy, no more than 7 or 8, was flying a kite shaped like a dragon. The red fabric snapped and fluttered wildly in the wind, the tail whipping behind it like something alive. The boy laughed with pure, unfiltered joy, calling out to his mother to look to see how high it was flying. Barry smiled faintly, his weathered face softening. There was something deeply comforting in witnessing happiness that had nothing to do with him, nothing to do with his legacy or his past. Just a boy and his kite and the endless sky. He was about to turn away, to continue his walk toward the end of the pier, where it was quieter, when a voice broke through the ambient noise. "Mr. Gibb?" The voice was soft, almost hesitant, as if the speaker wasn't entirely sure they should be speaking at all. Barry turned slowly, his blue eyes searching for the source. A man stood a few feet away, frozen mid-step as if he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. He looked to be in his early 50s, with graying hair that was beginning to thin at the temples and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that caught the afternoon light. He wore a simple blue sweater over a white-collared shirt and jeans that were faded from use. In his hand was a paper cup of coffee, steam still rising from the lid. Barry's expression remained neutral but polite. Over the years, he had learned to manage these encounters with grace, though they still sometimes caught him off guard. Some people wanted autographs, others wanted photos. A few wanted to tell him long stories about where they were when they first heard "Stayin' Alive" or "Night Fever." "Yes," Barry replied, his voice carrying the gentle lilt of his Isle of Man heritage, softened by decades spent in America. "Can I help you?" The man took a small, tentative step forward, his expression sincere and almost apologetic. "I'm so sorry to bother you. I really am. I saw you standing here, and I wasn't sure if I should say anything. I've been debating it for the last 5 minutes, actually, walking back and forth like an idiot." Barry's lips twitched into a small smile. "Well, you're here now. What's on your mind?" The man exhaled, as if he'd been holding his breath for those entire 5 minutes. "My name is Daniel Morrison. I don't know if this will mean anything to you, and I'll completely understand if you want me to leave you alone. But I wanted to thank you." Barry tilted his head slightly, intrigued despite himself. "Thank me? For what?" Daniel looked down at his coffee, swirling it gently in the cup, then back up at Barry. His eyes held something deep and genuine, something that made Barry take notice, for something you probably never even knew happened. Barry studied him for a moment, seeing no trace of the usual fan enthusiasm or nervous energy. This was something else, something quieter. "Well," he said gently, "you've got my attention. Would you like to sit down?" Daniel's face broke into a relieved smile. "I'd like that very much. Thank you." They walked together toward a bench near the edge of the pier, away from the bustle of families and the street performers. The bench was old, its green paint peeling in places, but it faced the ocean and offered a view that stretched all the way to the horizon. They sat down, and for a moment neither spoke. The waves provided a soundtrack, rhythmic and eternal. Finally, Daniel turned to Barry. "I promise I won't take up too much of your time. I've been carrying this story for a long time, and I think you should hear it." Barry settled back against the bench, folding his hands in his lap. "I'm listening." Chapter 2. A Story Unfolds. Daniel took a sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was steady but tinged with emotion held carefully in check. "It was 1993, he began. "I was 23 years old, living in a tiny studio apartment in Chicago, Wicker Park, if you know the area. It wasn't the trendy neighborhood it is now. Back then it was rough around the edges, affordable for people like me who didn't have much." Barry nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I'd just dropped out of Northwestern University," Daniel continued, his gaze distant as if he were looking back through the tunnel of years. "I'd been studying engineering, and I was actually doing pretty well academically. But my dad died suddenly, heart attack, and everything fell apart. My mom couldn't handle the bills on her own, and I had a younger sister still in high school. So I left school and came home to help. That must have been incredibly difficult," Barry said quietly. "It was," Daniel admitted, "but at the time I didn't let myself feel it. I just did what needed to be done. I got 2 jobs, one at a grocery store during the day, stocking shelves and working the register, the other washing dishes at a 24-hour diner on the north side. I'd work from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon at the grocery store, then head to the diner and work from 4 until midnight, sometimes later." Barry's expression grew more somber. He understood exhaustion, understood the weight of responsibility that sometimes crushed the young. "I was making just enough to cover rent, help my mom with her mortgage, and keep food on the table," Daniel continued. "But I was exhausted all the time. Not just physically, though. That was brutal. Mentally, emotionally, but I was depleted. I felt like I was running on empty, like I was just a machine going through the motions." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "But more than that, I felt invisible. I'd go to work and people would barely look at me. I was the guy who bagged their groceries or refilled their water glasses. I wasn't a person with dreams or potential. I was just there, existing, surviving." Barry felt something constrict in his chest. He had known that feeling in his own way, during the dark periods after his brothers had passed, when the world still saw him as Barry Gibb of the Bee Gees, but he felt like a ghost of himself. "The apartment I lived in was barely 400 square feet, Daniel said, a sad smile crossing his face. "The heat barely worked in winter, and the air conditioning didn't work at all in summer. I had a mattress on the floor, a couple of milk crates as furniture, and this old radio I'd gotten from a thrift store for $5. He looked at Barry directly now, his eyes glistening. "That radio became my lifeline. When I'd come home from my shifts, too tired to eat, too wired to sleep, I'd turn it on and just listen. Music was the only thing that made me feel human." Barry's throat tightened. He understood this too. Music as sanctuary, music as salvation. One night, it was early December, I remember, because there was snow on the ground, and the city had that muffled, quiet feeling it gets when it snows. I came home after a double shift. I'd worked the grocery store, then covered for someone at the diner who'd called in sick, so I'd been on my feet for almost 18 hours straight. Daniel's voice began to shake slightly. I walked up 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, unlocked the door, and just collapsed. I didn't even make it to the mattress. I sat down right there on the floor, my back against the door, still wearing my coat because I was too tired to take it off. Barry leaned forward slightly, fully absorbed in the story. "And I broke down," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just started crying. Not loud, dramatic crying, just silent tears running down my face. I remember thinking, this is my life. This is all it's going to be. I'm going to work myself to death and no one will even notice." He wiped at his eyes with the heel of his hand, embarrassed. "Sorry. I told myself I wouldn't get emotional." Don't apologize," Barry said firmly. "Please. This matters." Daniel nodded, composing himself. I reached over and turned on the radio. It was tuned to this FM station that played classic hits from the 70s and 80s. Usually it was just background noise, something to fill the silence. He took a deep breath. But that night your song came on. How Deep Is Your Love? Barry's breath caught. That song, written with his brothers decades ago, recorded in a studio in France, released into the world without any knowledge of where it would land or whose life it might touch. I'd heard it before, obviously, Daniel continued. It's one of those songs everyone knows, but that night it was different. I sat there on that cold floor and I listened to every single word, really listened. His voice grew softer, more reverent. The way you sang it, there was so much tenderness, so much love. And even though I knew it was a love song, in that moment it felt like it was speaking directly to me, like someone was saying, "You matter, you're seen, you're loved, even when you can't see it." Barry felt tears prick at his own eyes. He had sung that song thousands of times, performed it on stages around the world, but he had never imagined this moment, this connection. "The lyrics," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I believe in you. You know the door to my very soul." He laughed softly, sadly. "It sounds ridiculous, maybe, but in that moment, I felt like those words were meant for me, like someone, somewhere believed in me, even though I didn't believe in myself." Barry couldn't speak. He simply listened, his heart breaking and healing at the same time. "I played that song 3 times in a row that night," Daniel said. "Just sat there on the floor, in my coat, crying and listening. And by the 3rd time, something shifted. I can't explain it exactly, but it was like I'd been drowning, and suddenly someone had thrown me a rope." He looked directly at Barry, his eyes red but clear. "That night, I made a decision. I decided I wasn't going to give up. I didn't know how things would get better. I didn't have a plan, but I knew I had to keep going, and it was your song that gave me the strength to make that choice." Chapter 3. The Turning Point. Barry sat in stunned silence, processing what he'd just heard. Around them, the pier continued its usual activity. Children laughing, couples taking selfies, the carousel music playing its endless loop. But it all felt distant, as if he and Daniel existed in a separate space, a private moment carved out of the ordinary world. "Daniel," Barry finally said, his voice hoarse, "I had no idea. I mean, of course I didn't. But hearing this, He trailed off, struggling to find words adequate to the moment. "I know," Daniel said gently, "and that's actually what makes it so powerful. You had no idea. You couldn't have known. But it happened anyway." Barry wiped at his eyes, not bothering to hide his tears. At his age, he'd learned that tears were nothing to be ashamed of. "Tell me what happened after that night, please." Daniel nodded, taking another sip of his coffee, which had likely gone cold by now. "Well, things didn't magically get better overnight. I still had the same 2 jobs, the same struggles, but something inside me had changed. I started looking for opportunities instead of just surviving day to day." He shifted on the bench, turning to face Barry more fully. A few weeks later, maybe early January of 1994, a regular at the diner mentioned that his brother-in-law ran a small construction company and needed help with a remodeling project. It wasn't skilled labor, just hauling materials, cleaning up, that kind of thing, but it paid better than washing dishes. "So you took it," Barry said. "I did, and it turned out I was pretty good at it. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I could follow instructions well. The brother-in-law, his name was Tom, he noticed that. After the first project wrapped up, he asked if I wanted to stay on for the next one. Then the next one after that." A small smile appeared on Daniel's face, the first genuine smile Barry had seen since their conversation began. "Within 6 months, Tom was teaching me actual construction skills, framing, drywall, basic electrical work. He saw something in me that I didn't see in myself." "He gave you a chance," Barry observed. "He did. And I worked harder than I'd ever worked before because I knew what it meant. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was a future." Daniel leaned back against the bench, his gaze drifting to the ocean. I kept the grocery store job for another year, just to be safe, but eventually I was making enough with construction that I could quit and focus on that. I started taking night classes at a community college, learning about business management, accounting, that kind of thing. You were building something, Barry said. I was, Daniel agreed. And the whole time, I kept thinking about that night on the floor, about your song, about the decision I'd made to keep going. It became like a touchstone for me. Whenever things got hard, and they did get hard, I'd remember that moment and remind myself that I'd already survived the worst. Barry felt a profound sense of humility washing over him. He had written songs because he loved music, because it was in his blood, because he and his brothers had needed to express something that couldn't be said any other way. But this was beyond anything he'd ever imagined. By 1997, Daniel continued, I'd saved up enough money to start my own small contracting business. Just me and one other guy, taking on small residential projects. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I was my own boss for the first time in my life. That must have felt incredible, Barry said. It did. It was terrifying too, if I'm honest. The responsibility, the financial risk. But I'd learned something important. That fear isn't a reason to stop. It's just part of the process. Daniel paused, his expression becoming more tender. In 1999, I met my wife, Rebecca. She was a schoolteacher, working at an elementary school on the south side. We met at a community garden project. I was volunteering to build raised beds for the kids to plant vegetables in, and she was organizing the whole thing. Barry smiled. A gardener and a builder. Sounds like a good match. It was. It is, Daniel corrected himself with a soft laugh. We got married in 2001. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. And I'll tell you something, when we had our first dance, the song we chose was How Deep Is Your Love? Barry's eyes widened. Really? Really, Daniel confirmed. Rebecca didn't know the whole story at first. I'd mentioned that the song meant something to me, but I hadn't gone into detail. But on our wedding night, after everyone had gone home and we were sitting in our tiny apartment, not much bigger than that studio I'd had in Wicker Park, I told her everything. About that night in 1993, about your song, about the choice I'd made. He smiled at the memory. She cried. Then she held me and said, You need to thank him someday. If you ever get the chance, you need to tell him what his music did for you. Barry felt a lump forming in his throat. And here you are. Here I am, Daniel said, 25 years later, keeping a promise to my wife. Chapter 4. The Ripple Effect. They sat together in companionable silence for a moment, both men lost in their own thoughts. A young couple walked by pushing a stroller, their laughter mingling with the cry of the seagulls overhead. The sun was sinking lower now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Barry finally broke the silence. You mentioned you have children? Daniel's face lit up. 2 daughters, Emma and Sarah. Emma's 21, studying environmental science at Berkeley. Sarah's 18, just started at Oregon State, studying graphic design. Oregon, Barry noted. So you left Chicago? About 15 years ago, Daniel explained. The construction business had grown pretty substantially. We had a crew of about 15 guys, and we were doing well. But Rebecca and I wanted to raise the girls somewhere with more space, cleaner air, better schools. We visited Portland on a vacation and just fell in love with the Pacific Northwest. He gestured vaguely toward the north. We ended up in a small town about 30 miles outside Portland. Population maybe 15,000. The girls could ride their bikes to school. We had a backyard with actual trees, and the pace of life was just gentler. It sounds wonderful, Barry said sincerely. It has been, Daniel agreed. I sold the Chicago business and started fresh in Oregon. Took a few years to build up a client base, but word of mouth is powerful in small towns. Now we specialize in sustainable building, solar panels, energy-efficient materials, that kind of thing. Emma's environmental passion rubbed off on me, I guess. Barry chuckled. Children have a way of teaching us, don't they? They really do. Daniel's expression grew more serious. I've tried to teach them about resilience, about not giving up when things get hard. And I've told them about that night in Chicago, about your song. I wanted them to understand that sometimes the smallest thing, a song on the radio, a kind word from a stranger, a moment of unexpected beauty, can change everything. How did they react? Barry asked, genuinely curious. Emma was about 12 when I first told her the full story, Daniel recalled. She was going through a rough patch at school, some friendship drama that felt like the end of the world to her. She came home crying one day, saying she wanted to switch schools, that everything was terrible. He smiled softly. Rebecca and I sat down with her that night, and I told her about 1993, about being so exhausted and hopeless that I couldn't see a way forward, and about how one song, 3.5 minutes of music, gave me just enough strength to take the next step. Then the step after that. Did it help? Barry asked. It did, Daniel said. She didn't switch schools. She worked through the friendship issues, learned some hard lessons about communication and boundaries, and came out stronger. And whenever she faces something difficult now, she references that story. She calls it the 3-minute miracle. Barry laughed, a genuine warm sound. I like that. The 3-minute miracle. Sarah's response was different, Daniel continued. She's more analytical, more questioning. When I told her the story, she was maybe 14. She asked me if I really thought a song could have that much power, or if I was just in a vulnerable state and would have felt better anyway. That's a fair question, Barry observed. It is, Daniel agreed. And I told her the truth. I don't know. Maybe I would have pulled myself together eventually without your song. Maybe I would have found strength somewhere else, but the fact is, I didn't. It was your song that reached me in that moment. And whether that's magic or coincidence or just good timing doesn't really matter. What matters is that it happened, and it changed the trajectory of my life. He looked at Barry intently. That's what I wanted her to understand. That we don't always know why things happen the way they do, but that doesn't make them less real or less important. Barry nodded slowly, absorbing this. Your daughters are lucky to have you as a father. I'm the lucky one, Daniel said simply. Every day I get to spend with them, every milestone I get to witness, it all traces back to that choice I made on a December night in 1993. If I'd given up then, none of this would exist. Emma and Sarah wouldn't exist. And that thought, his voice cracked, that thought terrifies me and humbles me in equal measure. Chapter 5. The Weight of Creation. Barry was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the ocean met the sky. When he spoke, his voice was contemplative, almost vulnerable. You know, Daniel, in all my years of making music, and it's been a lot of years, I've never quite known how to process moments like this. People tell me all the time that they love our songs, that they dance to them at their wedding, or that they remind them of their youth. And that's wonderful. It really is. He turned to look at Daniel directly. But what you're describing is something different. You're telling me that a song I wrote, that my brothers and I recorded in a studio in France in 1977, literally saved your life, or at least gave you the will to save your own life. And I don't know what to do with that. Daniel listened intently, respecting the vulnerability in Barry's words. When we wrote How Deep Is Your Love, Barry continued, we were in Château d'Hérouville, this old mansion outside Paris that had been converted into a recording studio. It was for the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, and we knew we needed something romantic, something that would speak to the feeling of deep, enduring love. He smiled faintly at the memory. We wrote it in about an hour, actually. Maurice and Robin and I, we were all contributing ideas, playing with melodies. It felt like it just flowed out of us, like it already existed somewhere, and we were just the ones chosen to bring it into being. That's a beautiful way to think about creativity, Daniel said. It is, Barry agreed, but it's also a heavy responsibility, one I didn't fully understand at the time. When you create something and release it into the world, You lose control of what it means. It becomes whatever people need it to be. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I've had people tell me they hate that song because it was playing when they got bad news. I've had others say it's the most beautiful thing they've ever heard. And both responses are valid because music is deeply personal. It meets people where they are. And it met me in a freezing apartment in Chicago, Daniel said softly, when I needed it most. Exactly, Barry said. And I didn't orchestrate that. I wasn't thinking about a struggling young man in Chicago when I wrote those lyrics. I was thinking about love in the abstract, about connection, about the question of whether anyone truly knows us. He looked down at his hands, weathered and marked by age. But somehow, despite my intentions, or lack thereof, the song found you, and in finding you, it served a purpose I never could have imagined. Daniel nodded. That's the mystery of art, isn't it? The creator makes something with one intention, and it becomes something entirely different in the hands or ears of the audience. It is, Barry agreed, and it's humbling because it means that the songs I thought were throwaways might be someone's favorite, and the ones I was most proud of might not resonate with anyone. There's no formula, no way to predict which piece of music will touch which soul. He sighed deeply. After Morris died in 2003 and then Robin in 2012, I struggled with whether to keep making music. They were my brothers, my partners, my other halves. The Bee Gees didn't exist without them, not really. I could perform the old songs, but creating new ones felt wrong somehow. I can only imagine how painful that loss was, Daniel said gently. It was devastating, Barry admitted. There were days when I didn't want to get out of bed, when the weight of their absence was so heavy I could barely breathe, and I'd think, what's the point? What does any of it matter? He looked at Daniel with raw honesty. But then I'd get letters, emails, messages from people all over the world telling me what the music meant to them, how it helped them through their own losses, their own struggles, and I realized that even though Maurice and Robin were gone, the music we created together was still alive, still doing work in the world, still saving lives, Daniel added quietly. Still saving lives, Barry echoed, though I never put it in those terms until right now talking to you. Chapter 6. The Conversation Deepens. The sun had dipped lower on the horizon, and the air had grown cooler. A few people walked by, glancing at the two men on the bench, perhaps recognizing Barry, perhaps not. It didn't matter. This moment existed outside of fame or recognition. Can I ask you something? Daniel said after a pause. Of course, Barry replied. Do you ever worry that you've peaked? That the best work is behind you? It was a bold question, but asked with such genuine curiosity that Barry didn't take offense. Instead, he considered it seriously. All the time, he admitted. When you've had the kind of success we had, the #1 hits, the sold-out arenas, the cultural impact, there's always that voice in the back of your mind asking, will you ever reach those heights again? And the honest answer is, probably not. How do you top Stayin' Alive? How do you recreate that moment in musical history? But maybe that's not the point, Daniel suggested. No, Barry agreed. Maybe it's not. I've come to realize that chasing past glory is a fool's errand. What I did with my brothers was perfect for that moment in time, but this moment right now requires something different from me. What does it require? Daniel asked. Barry thought about this, watching the waves roll in with their eternal patience. Authenticity, gratitude, presence. I'm 77 years old. I've lived a life that most people couldn't imagine. The highs and the lows, the triumphs and the tragedies. What I have to offer now isn't another disco anthem. It's wisdom, maybe, or at least perspective. He turned back to Daniel. Meeting you today, hearing your story, this matters more to me than any award I've ever won, because this is real. This is the actual impact of the work, stripped of all the commercial success and industry recognition. This is one human being telling another, you helped me survive. And that's... He paused, his voice thick with emotion. That's everything. Daniel's eyes were glistening again. I'm so glad I approached you. I almost didn't. I thought, he's probably tired of fans interrupting his day. He probably hears this kind of thing all the time. Barry shook his head firmly. I don't. Not like this. Most people tell me they love the music, which is wonderful. But you told me something much more important. You told me that the music mattered in a way that transcends entertainment. It had real-world consequences. It literally changed the course of your life. It did, Daniel confirmed, and not just mine. When I decided to keep going that night, I set in motion a chain of events that led to Rebecca, to our daughters, to the business, to the community we've built in Oregon. Every person I've employed, every home we've helped build, every student Rebecca has taught, all of it exists because I didn't give up. And you're saying I played a part in that? Barry said, still processing the magnitude of it. Not just a part, Daniel corrected gently. You were the catalyst, you and your brothers. That song was the match that lit the fire. Barry sat with this for a moment, feeling the weight and the wonder of it. You know what's extraordinary? He finally said. I've been making music for over 60 years, thousands of songs, hundreds of performances, and most of it just disappears into the ether. You never know where it goes or what it does. But it does something, Daniel said, even when you don't see it. Even when I don't see it, Barry agreed. And that's what I'm realizing sitting here with you. The real work of art isn't the creation itself. It's what happens after, in all the private moments when someone listens and finds exactly what they need. He smiled, a sad but beautiful expression. Maurice and Robin never knew about your story. They never knew that a song we wrote in an afternoon would save a young man's life 13 years after we recorded it. But they were part of it nonetheless. Their voices, their harmonies, their creativity, it's all there in that recording. Still doing its work. They live on through the music, Daniel said. They do, Barry confirmed, his voice breaking slightly. And hearing you tell me this, I feel connected to them again in a way I haven't in years. Like they're still here, still creating ripples in the world through the work we did together. Chapter 7. Full Circle. The carousel had stopped playing its music, and the pier was beginning to empty as people headed home for dinner. The sky was a masterpiece of purples and deep blues, the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening canvas above. I should let you go, Daniel said reluctantly. I've already taken up so much of your afternoon. Don't apologize, Barry said quickly. This has been... I don't even have words for what this has been. Profound, life-affirming. Those words don't feel adequate. Daniel stood up from the bench and Barry did the same, both men stretching slightly after sitting for so long. They stood facing each other, two strangers who now shared something deeply sacred. Before you go, Barry said, I want to ask you something. Would you mind if I stayed in touch? Maybe exchanged emails or phone numbers? I'd like to know how you're doing, how your family is doing. Daniel looked surprised and touched. I'd love that, really. Rebecca will be thrilled, and the girls. They'll be amazed that I actually met you. They exchanged contact information, Barry typing Daniel's number into his phone with the careful deliberation of someone not entirely comfortable with modern technology. When they were finished, they stood awkwardly for a moment, neither quite sure how to end such a meaningful encounter. Finally, Daniel extended his hand, but when Barry took it, he pulled Daniel into a gentle embrace instead. The two men stood there on the pier, holding each other, two souls connected across time and space by 3.5 minutes of music. Thank you, Barry whispered. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for the life you've built. Thank you, Daniel replied, his voice muffled against Barry's shoulder, for writing the song that made it all possible. When they pulled apart, both had tears streaming down their faces, but neither felt embarrassed. This was the kind of moment that demanded tears, that earned them. You'll email me? Daniel asked. I will, Barry promised. And you'll tell Rebecca and your daughters that we met? The moment I get home, Daniel said with a laugh. Actually, I'll probably call Rebecca from the car. She's not going to believe this. They said their final goodbyes, and Daniel walked away, turning back once to wave before disappearing into the crowd. Barry stood alone on the pier, watching the ocean, feeling more alive than he had in years. He thought about the young man in Chicago, sitting on a cold floor in 1993, listening to a song that had been written 16 years earlier. He thought about all the invisible threads connecting people across time and space, about how a moment of creative inspiration could echo forward into the future in ways impossible to predict. He thought about Maurice and Robin, his brothers, his partners, his friends, about how they had created something together that outlived them, that continued to do good work in the world long after they were gone. And he thought about Daniel Morrison, husband, father, businessman, survivor, whose life had been irrevocably changed by 3 minutes and 33 seconds of music. As the stars emerged fully in the darkening sky, Barry pulled out his phone and opened his email. He found Daniel's address and began to type, "Dear Daniel, I'm sitting on the pier where we met, watching the ocean and thinking about our conversation. I wanted to write to you while everything is still fresh, while I can still feel the full weight of what you shared with me. In my decades of making music, I've received countless accolades and awards. I've had #1 hits and platinum records. I've performed for millions of people around the world. But nothing, and I mean nothing, has meant more to me than what you told me today. You reminded me why we create art. Not for the fame or the money or the recognition, though those things are nice. We create because art has the power to reach people in their darkest moments and offer them light. We create because a song can save a life. I will carry your story with me for the rest of my days. When I perform How Deep Is Your Love Now, I won't just be singing lyrics I wrote nearly 50 years ago. I'll be thinking of you, sitting on that floor in Chicago, making the choice to keep going. Please give my best to Rebecca and your daughters. Tell them that their husband and father is a remarkable man and that I'm honored to have met him. And Daniel, thank you. Thank you for approaching me on the pier. Thank you for your courage in sharing your story. Thank you for surviving. With deep gratitude and respect, Barry." He pressed send and sat back, watching the email disappear into the digital ether, another invisible thread connecting two souls across space. The pier was nearly empty now. The boy with the dragon kite was long gone. The fishermen had packed up their gear. Even the seagulls seemed to have settled for the night. But Barry remained, not quite ready to leave this sacred space. He thought about all the people out there in the world listening to music right now. Songs written by him, by his brothers, by countless other artists. Songs that were soundtracking moments of joy and sorrow, triumph and despair. And he hoped, prayed even, that somewhere right now someone was hearing exactly the song they needed to hear. That somewhere a piece of music was giving someone the strength to take one more step, to make one more choice, to survive one more day. Because that, he realized, was the true power of art. Not the creation itself, but what happened after. The moments no one saw, the impacts no one could measure, the lives changed in ways the artist would never know. Unless, of course, someone like Daniel Morrison found the courage to approach a stranger on a pier and say thank you. Barry smiled, standing up slowly and stretching his back. He took one last look at the ocean, at the endless rhythm of the waves, at the stars beginning to shine in the velvet sky. Then he turned and walked back toward the parking lot, toward his car, toward home. But he walked differently than he had arrived. He walked with a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of what his life's work had truly meant. He walked like a man who had just been given the greatest gift an artist can receive. The knowledge that his art had mattered. Not in the abstract, not in record sales or chart positions, but in the most concrete, beautiful way possible. His art had saved a life, and that life had gone on to create other lives, to build a family, to contribute to a community, to make the world a little bit better. All because of 3 minutes and 33 seconds of music written on an afternoon in France, recorded with his brothers, and released into the world without any knowledge of where it would land. It had landed in Chicago on a December night in 1993, in the heart of a young man who needed it most. And 33 years later, on a pier in Santa Monica, that young man, now a husband and father and business owner, had found the courage to say thank you. Barry got into his car and sat for a moment before starting the engine. He looked at his phone and saw that Daniel had already replied to his email. Barry, you'll never know what it meant to meet you today. I've been driving home, and I've had to pull over twice because I keep crying. Happy tears, though. Healing tears. Rebecca says to tell you that she's making your favorite Bee Gees album tonight's soundtrack for dinner. We're celebrating the magic of music and the power of connection. Thank you for being exactly who you are. Thank you for every song you've ever written. Thank you for saying yes when a stranger approached you on a pier. Your music gave me a life. Today, you gave me closure and joy I didn't even know I needed. Forever grateful. Daniel. Barry read the email 3 times, each time feeling a fresh wave of emotion. Then he started the car and drove home through the Los Angeles twilight, the city lights beginning to twinkle like earthbound stars. When he arrived home, Linda was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She looked up as he entered and immediately noticed something different in his expression. "Are you okay?" she asked, setting down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables. "I met someone today," Barry said, his voice full of wonder. "Someone who thanked me for a moment I never knew about." And then he told her everything. The end.